You're listening to The Joe Martino Show, a podcast dealing with all things emotional, relational, and human nature. Joe is a licensed counselor in the state of Michigan, specializing in relationship therapy. He is also the author of the book, The Emotionally Secure Couple. All advice offered in this episode is offered for entertainment and educational purposes only. Enjoy the show.
All right, welcome back. I'm excited today. Erica is with me again. If you've been listening along, she stopped along a few times this fall, and this is hopefully going to be a regular thing that we're going to continue to do. Welcome, Erica.
Hey.
It's good to have you here. Today we're going to talk about compromise, and this is something that as therapists we see a lot in the room with our couples. Certainly as a married couple with 4 children, we see this a lot, even in our own lives. And I think one of the things as we kind of dive into this is a lot of people really have a terrible definition of compromise, right? There's this popular, compromise is meet in the middle. Well, meet in the middle of what is what I always ask them, because in order to meet in the middle, how do you do that? And so let's talk a little bit about compromise. What is it? How do we get to it? I have 4 steps that I'm going to share with everyone at the end, 4 questions that I give to all my clients, like, okay, this is how we get to compromise. And, you know, there are things that it isn't, and sometimes those things are, it's more about winning than it is about actually compromising, about growing the relationship. So, Erica, jump in wherever you want there, and let's kick this off.
I think that compromise is, I was actually going to say until you kind of diss that idea that it is meeting in the middle. But,
It's not.
You don't like that term, apparently.
No, because how do you define middle, right? Like what is the middle?
Well, what would you say it is?
What do I say what is?
If it's not meeting in the middle, what is it?
Compromise is where everybody gets a little bit of what they don't want and no one gets all of what they do want.
That's actually a pretty smart definition. I'll give that to you there.
Thank you. A little bit, because meet in the middle is so nebulous. In order to get, that's what nebulous means. In order to get to the middle, you both have to agree on the middle. Where with the definition that I use, you don't actually have to agree on what the middle is. You just have to agree on what you want and what I want, and then we have to figure out how much you're willing to not live with, how much I'm willing to not live with, how much you're willing to tolerate, and how much I'm willing to tolerate. And I think that's one of the reasons that couples get stuck is because they're planning on meeting in the middle, but neither one of them has a very clear idea of what the middle is. And if you don't know what the middle is, then there's no way you're going to meet there.
See, that's why I married you. You're not only incredibly hot,
incredibly big personality.
Yeah. You're also really smart. So see, I learned something. I like that definition.
Great.
So what I see with couples is they fight for power in these. Right?
Yeah.
Well,
yep.
I even heard recently someone said to me, well, we could take turns getting our way. But that sets you up for failure too.
Right. Mostly because it's a 3-year-old's approach to adult problem solving.
Sure,
hopefully your clients don't listen to this episode.
That's one way to say it. I think it's about how can we both, like you said, get a little bit of what we want. So what does that look like? I want to work. Oh, well, here's an example. We have to get some stuff done around the house, and you want to golf, and hunting season's coming up. And
my favorite season.
Your favorite season. Can we compromise a little bit, and where you can still get what you want done, but we can also get a little time towards the house? And how can we make that happen? That we both can get that. Or we compromise all the time when it comes to being with relatives, right? You almost spit out your tea right there. But, when we go to my family's house, they won't be offended. They know this is how it goes. You'll often say to me, I want to go off and write. And I'll say to you, well, there's this family activity, and I'd like you there. And you're like, okay, well, can I go sit at a coffee shop then for the afternoon and come back for the family activity? Absolutely. That works for me. And that's kind of where I think, your example of this is how we both win.
Right, because it has to be, the problem with the idea in the middle is it's still scorekeeping, right? You're still scorekeeping, and we know that healthy relationships don't keep score. And so if we're keeping score, even if the motive is good, we're almost always still going to lose on whatever it is that we're trying to do, whatever it is that we're trying to get done. It's not going to work out. And so the idea with, okay, well, we're going to take turns getting our way. The problem is, and recently, we encountered some people like, oh, you're a little judgy. And I was like, I don't really feel that I am, but here's going to be a statement that I know people are going to interpret as judgy. We're raising entitled, spoiled people. And I'm not even talking about kids. I always kind of laugh when the people that I think are the most entitled rail and rave about high schoolers being entitled. And that is bleeding into marriages, and that's destroying marriages, and that's why marriages are sitting on our couches. And that is not to shame anyone. It's just reality. We have told you that in order for your life to have meaning, it has to be all about you. And that's not only wrong, it's destructive. And people roll into their marriage and they want to win. They want to win because they've been told their whole life that whatever they want is the most important thing. And that's how they win. And obviously that is not accurate. And you and I both would say, well, no, that's actually a great way to really blow your marriage up. But people don't want to hear that.
Well, one of the things you often say is you can't be right and reconciled.
Correct.
And I think that you have to choose that even in situations like this when you're trying to figure out how to compromise.
Right. And that's something I've said on this show numerous times. Sorry, for those of you who are listening, you can't see this. I've been toying around with the idea of videoing some of our recordings and then using them as advertisements, little plugs. But the tripod that I have is not working. So if my voice sounds like my head's running all over, it's mostly because it is.
Your tripod kind of looks like an octopus, by the way.
Yeah, it's actually called an octopus tripod. So look at that.
See?
Yeah. And it's orange, which is your favorite color. And I got that color on purpose. That way every time I see it, I think of you.
Oh, aren't you sweet?
It's true. I am. But right. And so what happens is when you roll into a marriage and your operating starting point is I'm right or else, you're in trouble. It doesn't matter how much you want to compromise because you're always going to define compromise. You're going to be keeping a ledger of how many points you have versus how many points the other person has. And then you're no longer compromising. You're worried about being right and you won't be reconciled and be right.
One of the common arguments I see actually in the room is over household chores. Do you see that?
Household chores, who's running who to where, whose house are we spending, whose relative's house are we spending time at? What I always think is funny about the household chores, and we've even had this conversation, I think sometimes because people don't see the other person do chores, they overestimate how many chores they do in their head and they underestimate how many chores the other person does. And invariably, I'll have the conversation, somebody will be sitting there, well, he never does anything around the house. And he'll be like, that's not true. What do you want me to do? And she'll be like this. He's like, I just did that yesterday and last week. And there's this thing that we talk about a lot called discounting the positive, right? It's a cognitive distortion. I think that starts to play in there then because when everything is based on a final score, then I have to win because I'm a winner and that's what I do. And I am not going to sit here and listen to you tell me that you do more chores than me when I know I do more chores than you. And it's just silly. It's just silly.
Well, one of the things I even see a lot is when should the household stuff be done and who gets to decide if the toilets get cleaned every day or once a week and who gets to decide if the dishes have to be done after every meal or can they sit there until the next day or
where do they go if they sit there?
Right.
Do they go in the sink or on the counter? Had a couple of thought about that.
Yep.
Or, well, she'll ask me to do something. I'll say, yeah, I'll do it in a half hour. And then she's like, never mind, I'll do it. And she'll go get mad because it was not only supposed to be done, but it was supposed to be done when they wanted it done. Mm-hmm. And so this is how people get in trouble. How do you coach them in getting out of it?
I always, well, first of all, one of my favorite things, which probably people don't like, is if it's that big of a deal to you, do it yourself.
Yeah, imagine
right?
that. Imagine that.
You can't control someone else. So if you have a pet peeve that you don't want coffee mugs sitting on the end tables for more than a half hour, then okay, then you go around and collect the end tables. To be honest, I do this at my house. My kids are notorious for leaving coffee mugs in the living room. It's only a problem to me that they're sitting there, it seems like. I don't say anything to anyone. I just pick them up and put them in the sink because I have two arms and I can do that myself. It's
what do you
not a
say
big
to
deal.
people who are like, well, but then your kids will never learn to pick up after themselves?
Well, I hope I'm teaching them skills that, and I'm also acknowledging that they're also busy and giving them some grace in the season of their life.
Right, and I think that idea, that pushback is born in the all or nothing thinking fallacy. I really think that couples and compromise is one of the best areas where you see the cognitive distortions and logical fallacies just running amok in people's lives.
I even see it a lot with, unfortunately, with stay-at-home moms. I feel like I have this conversation a lot with them and their spouses over this idea of compromising and giving and take, because there's neither one of them understand the other person's job. The person who works outside the home, what their job entails, and then the person who works outside the home doesn't understand what the person who stays home does. And it's really important, compromise looks at hey, I'm going to look at it from your lens and what you might have going on in a day, and then set goals together. So you'd ask me well, how do you solve those? I tell couples, well, if you want the bathrooms cleaned every day, that might not that be realistic? Are you willing to agree that maybe the bathrooms could be cleaned 3 times a week? And most of the time when I ask those questions in the room, the person who's like, yeah, I want it done every week is like, I mean, yeah, I could live with 3 times a week. That would work. And all of a sudden, we've come in the middle of this argument.
I mean, technically, you're not in the middle.
Okay, let's start in the middle. We've come to a compromise. How's that?
I like
in
that.
This argument where both people get a little bit of what they want. See, borrowing your terms again.
And neither person got everything that they did want.
Correct.
And that's where it runs, a lot of times, one of the things I tell people all the time is you have to be able to tell your spouse no. You have to be able to look at your spouse and say, I understand that's what you want. That isn't what I want, and I'm not going to do it. And you need to have good reasons. Like, I don't think it needs to be done isn't necessarily a great reason, but it's a viable one. You can start there, right? I don't feel I have time. I'm not sure what I would take off my plate. Whatever. And then you both have to act like adults. And because you disagree on how often the bathroom needs cleaned doesn't mean you have permission or the right, air quotes, to be snarky about what's for supper. Like, it's just insane. We just give ourselves passes for poor behavior.
Yes.
And we can't do that.
And sometimes, like, compromising isn't an immediate result either. I remember when you were in grad school, people make comments to me all the time like, wow, Erica, you have to take care of the kids all the time, and you got to get them everywhere they're going, and you got to go buy them stuff just so Joe can go to school. Oh, how nice of you. Well, just so Joe could go to school. I mean, he was working 2-3 jobs still to try to support our family and go to grad school. And then guess what happened when I went to grad school? He was finished. He wasn't working 3 jobs. He was working 1 job, and he had to start doing all the running. I remember one time there was a recital and our daughter didn't have shoes, and we figured this out like an hour before her recital. I'm in class. I couldn't go. So Joe had to leave work, run to Meijer, get shoes for our daughter, get her to the recital, because, that was 3 years later. You kind of gave back what I was giving and vice versa, because we're a team.
One of the reasons I dropped out of the doctoral program I was in was because it didn't work for our family at that time. And that's the thing. The other problem with the meet in the middle mindset to me is it sets people up to fail to think long term, which is what you're talking about there.
Right.
And they only think short term. And by short term, and it's amazing to me, I think because you and I tend to be such long term thinkers, that I've had to learn over the years that people tend to think a long term is a month.
Right.
I'm thinking long term, it's 4 weeks. No, that's still short term, bro. And so what happens is as they start to think longer term, okay, well, so yeah, I'm doing it. We're out of balance in these 3 years from 07 to 10 while I'm in grad school, taking 15 credits an hour, working 3 jobs, right? Volunteering in the community for things that we were passionate about as a family. And then 3 years later, right? 2 years later, because it was the year Joey was born that I dropped out. Okay, I need to stop now, because this is what's best for our family. And the long-term ramifications of that have been great for us.
Yes.
But they might not have had the opportunity to come about if we didn't take that. We're going to live out of balance here for this time, and then we're going to live out of balance for this time. One of the things I was scheduled to do a training on self-care, and so I was kind of for counselors, and I was kind of picking the brain of the person who wanted it. And a lot of self-care comes down to this ideology, comes down to this idea of right now. I have to do whatever is best for me right now, because if I'm out of balance right now, I'll be out of balance for the rest of my life. That's insanity, and it definitely blows up relationships. So compromise is recognizing I'm going to be with this woman. Ideally, we got married, I was 25. Hopefully I don't die till I'm 100. So, 75 years, I'm going to be with this woman. We can probably compromise a little bit here or there and move through it. So I do have 4 questions that I want to get to, but I want to make sure you have enough time. Is there anything else that you want to say about this?
I just want to say, even with having to drop out of your doctorate program, you were never once like, oh, I failed, or I had to lose here so you could go get your degree, Erica.
Right.
It was, we had to talk like, well, what's best for our family?
Right.
Which means it's not about winning or losing, it's the big picture. And I think that's where couples fail to step back and stop and evaluate. Like, am I looking at the big picture on what's best overall for the family?
Right. It wasn't about like, oh, I got to quit. And it literally is, hey, what's best for our family? What sets us up for success? And I think part of the problem is, too, people make decisions that turn out to be not best for the family. But rather than go through the pain of trying to undo that decision and then make a better decision, they get stuck because they're bent on winning. They're going to make this work, and they just keep applying intensity, and it doesn't work.
Can you have one more example?
Yeah.
Like you and I often talk about you've dreamed to have a boat, right? Like it comes up every summer you want a boat. The Martinos still do not own a boat. But one of the things is I don't say to you like, oh my gosh, Joe, no, we're never getting a boat. It's, well, what might come before that? And we agree as a family, like, okay, well, this other thing might be a little more of a priority than a boat right now. And a boat, it's not out of the question. It's just, we have to set in the tension of there's other things more important right now.
Right. What's the old joke? I wanted a boat, you wanted a camper, so we compromised and we got a camper.
That's your old joke, by the way.
And so there is this idea of making sure that the decisions are in the best interest of your relationship. But I'd push it out. And so here's 4 steps that I teach all my clients. What do you want? Write that down and get your spouse or your partner to be able to write that down too. And that should be 1 or 2 sentences. What does your spouse or partner want? You should be able to get that down to 1 or 2 sentences. You both need to spend time answering that question down to 1 or 2 sentences. Then, is it possible to do both? If it is, then we're on easy street and there's really not a whole lot of work to do here besides do the scheduling of where are we going to end up. Then the 4th question, and this is where it gets more complicated, what if we can't do both, right? What if me buying the boat means we can't buy the camper, or we buying the camper means I can't buy the boat? How do we make that work? Or if it's, I want my kids to go to this school and she wants our kids to go to that school, or she wants to go to Christmas Eve service and I think that time should be spent at home. You can't do both of those. So then you have to kind of have a subset of questions, and which decision best represents our family values. Now, this is not an exact science because, when we're trying to make decisions and compromises between good or bad, that's easy. When we're trying to make decisions and compromises between good and good, then we've got trouble. Then it's difficulty, right? And so that's fine. But what best represents our family values? And this is the conversation that you and I have a ton. Okay, so fine, we want to do this, but how does that fit into the greater scope of what we're trying to do? And so there's 2 questions inherent there. What are our family values? And what's the bigger picture of what we're trying to get done here, right? Is it just to create memories for the kids? Is it to create memories for the kids and leave a legacy for our grandkids? What is it? What is it that we're trying to do? And how does it fit? Because it's always going to cost you something. And so when you start having to figure out what is it that works best for our values and what we're trying to do with our family, most of the time there's space to figure out how do we make those compromises. So rather than the bathroom getting cleaned every day, it gets cleaned 3 times a week or 2 times a week. Or rather than, laundry getting done by one person, we split it up. Whatever it is, it has to be about more than the event that you're arguing about. The conversation has to be about how does the event or the decision that you're discussing fit into your family value. And that's usually where I leave clients. And it's hard work, but it can be done. Anything you want to finish with?
No, that sounds perfect.
Awesome. All right. Thanks so much for listening. If you found value in this, please share it with your friends. We find meaning by sharing things with other people. So find 3 friends, share this episode with them. Give us a rating in the app store of your choice for podcast players. If you have any questions, feel free to email me, joe@joemartino.com. Put podcast in the subject line. Thanks so much for listening. We'll catch you next week.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share with a friend. And hey, give us that rating in your podcast store. Until next time, change possible.